high in the brooding ridgelines of the Taurus Mountains, where the rock faces rise in pale layers and the wind cuts through juniper forests with an almost mournful hush, the traces of a forgotten kingdom still cling to the stone. Here, amid the peaks that pierce low-hanging clouds, in scattered fragments of ancient walls, in the weathered faces of rock-carved inscriptions, and in the faint outlines of citadels etched into hilltops, lingers the enigmatic memory of Tuwana. It was not a kingdom born of conquest, nor one felled by dramatic defeat, but a realm that emerged patiently, quietly, amidst the rubble of empire, surviving by deftly navigating the treacherous contours of a fractured and uncertain world. The Bronze Age, a golden epoch of stability, prosperity, and interconnected kingdoms, had not concluded with orderly transition, but had instead collapsed violently. Across the eastern Mediterranean, cities erupted into flame, palaces fell into ruin, and bustling harbours lay abandoned as once thriving trade networks ceased abruptly. The Hittite Empire, a mighty power of Anatolia that had unified vast territories, fragmented into rival factions, local principalities, and wandering bands of displaced peoples. It was within this turbulent vacuum that Tuwana emerged, not as a conquering force, but as a beacon of stability and continuity amid the chaos of the Iron Age dawn. Nestled in central Anatolia, within the expansive region known today as the Konya Plain, Tuwana represented both frontier and refuge. Its existence was precariously balanced between powerful neighbours. To the east, the relentless Assyrian Empire pressed westward, its armies marching under the fierce banners of imperial expansion. To the west, the ascendant Phrygian kingdom, rich in culture and ambition, extended its influence steadily inland. Caught between these giants, Tuwana thrived on the careful balance of diplomacy, strategic appeasement, and resilient autonomy. The kings of Tuwana, cognizant of their historical inheritance, consciously embraced their Hittite legacy. They styled themselves in the tradition of their illustrious predecessors, carving monumental hieroglyphic Luwian inscriptions into stone, building fortified cities atop commanding hills, and invoking ancient gods whose reverence dated back centuries. King Warpalawas, reigning prominently in the mid-8th century BC, emerges vividly from surviving records, his reign inscribed in reliefs and inscriptions that speak volumes about his legitimacy, piety, and political acumen. His most iconic depiction at Ivriz, where he stands before the mighty storm god Tarhunzes, symbolizes both his devotion and his sovereign authority, asserting that he alone mediated divine favor for his people. The relief at Ivriz, carved beside a bubbling freshwater spring, epitomizes Tuwana's identity. The towering figure of Tarhunzes, clutching wheat and grapes in symbols of fertility and abundance, dwarfs, yet dignifies the king beside him. The inscriptions curling around these figures bind ruler to deity and people to land, proclaiming a harmonious cosmic order amidst worldly chaos. This potent imagery reinforced the kingdom's cultural and religious traditions, fostering a sense of continuity in a rapidly transforming world. Yet, Tuwana's survival relied heavily on shrewd political maneuvering. Assyrian chronicles document tribute payments from Warpalawas, careful gifts of submission that allowed Tuwana autonomy without provoking destructive reprisals. Such pragmatism was essential. Assyria's wrath was notorious, yet Warpalawas wisely sought coexistence rather than confrontation, maintaining sovereignty through measured cooperation. Simultaneously, Tuwana grappled with Phrygian influence from the northwest, whose artisans, traders and settlers left tangible imprints upon Tuwana's cultural fabric. Artifacts unearthed by archaeologists reveal subtle Phrygian influence, ceramics, metalwork and burial practices interwoven with traditional Luwian customs. This hybridization suggests cautious but significant interaction, possibly diplomatic alliances or strategic intermarriages, enabling Tuwana to balance Assyrian dominance with regional Phrygian dynamics. Central to Tuwana's identity, however, was its steadfast retention of hieroglyphic Luwian script. Amid widespread linguistic transformations towards Aramaic or Greek alphabets, Tuwana preserved this ancient writing tradition, meticulously carving their language onto stone monuments and stelae. This cultural conservatism reflected deeper currents, an enduring reverence for ancestral practices, an assertion of identity amidst external pressures, and a quiet resilience that defined Tuwana's ethos. The fortified urban centres of Tuwana embodied this blend of continuity and innovation. Archaeological excavations reveal robust defensive walls, winding across steep hillsides, designed both to withstand siege and to symbolise enduring authority. Within these walls, daily life unfolded with deliberate routine. Farmers tended terraced fields, artisans crafted goods with inherited techniques, priests performed rituals venerating ancient gods, and rulers administered justice guided by customary laws. Yet Tuwana's quiet stability belied underlying fragility. Its survival hinged precariously on the diplomatic agility of its rulers, the cohesion of its communities, and external geopolitical factors. By the late 7th century BC, shifting regional dynamics increasingly strained its resources. The gradual encroachment of larger empires and emergent city-states reduced Tuwana's political maneuverability, prompting either absorption into larger powers or gradual dissolution into fragmented tribal entities. Records grow silent, inscriptions cease abruptly. Tuwana fades gently from historical narrative, disappearing into layers of sediment, its existence largely forgotten by subsequent generations. Modern archaeology now endeavours to reconstruct the lost story of Tuwana. Fragments of inscriptions, remnants of city walls, temple ruins, and pottery shards emerge incrementally from Anatolian earth, providing tantalizing glimpses into this resilient kingdom's past. Each artifact recovered speaks volumes of endurance and adaptation, of a people who confronted existential threats not through grand conquest, but through quiet determination. Today, visitors wandering the windswept sites like Ivoris encounter remnants that whisper softly of former glories. Tourists pass fleetingly, captivated briefly by the striking reliefs, seldom lingering to fully comprehend their deeper historical resonance. Yet for those attuned to subtlety, each weathered inscription, each ancient stone, narrates a profound tale of resilience and dignity amid adversity. Ultimately, Tuwana's legacy lies not in spectacular ruins or famous victories, but in the stubborn continuity it represented, a kingdom that endured amidst historical upheaval, holding fast to tradition and identity. It stands as a poignant reminder of endurance, quietly affirming that survival itself, amid chaos and change, can be its own triumph. And high above the plains, in the eternal silence of Anatolian hills, that gentle defiance resonates timelessly, echoing through ages, reminding all who pause to listen that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in domination, but in determined perseverance. The story of the Champa Kingdom began along the rugged coastline of what we now know as central and southern Vietnam, a land shaped by the relentless forces of sea and storm. Here, under skies often heavy with monsoon rains and across shores lashed by crashing waves, the Cham people established a civilization whose echoes would resonate across the millennia. Born from a blend of indigenous Southeast Asian cultures and the influences carried by Indian traders, the Champa Kingdom emerged around the 2nd century AD, creating a society distinct in its traditions and powerful in its maritime influence. In these early days, the Cham inhabited coastal plains that opened onto the vast expanse of the South China Sea. This sea was both their lifeline and frontier, a gateway to wealth and influence. They watched from sandy shores as distant ships emerged over the horizon, sails billowing, laden with precious cargoes of spices, silk, and precious stones. Yet these vessels carried more than mere goods. They brought with them cultural treasures and ideas, a tapestry of beliefs and philosophies that would profoundly influence Cham civilization. Chief among these imported ideologies was Hinduism, a religion that found fertile ground among the Cham elite and soon spread through the kingdom. Sanskrit became the language of religious and intellectual discourse, evident in inscriptions painstakingly etched into temple walls and stone pillars. The adoption of Sanskrit symbolized the deep connection between Champa and the broader Indic cultural sphere, a connection that would profoundly shape the kingdom's spiritual and cultural landscape for centuries to come. Amid lush forests and fertile valleys, the Cham erected sprawling cities that stood as testament to their architectural genius and religious devotion. The most celebrated of these urban centres was Mai Sun, nestled in a verdant valley ringed by mountains and intersected by streams whose waters shimmered in sunlight. This city was a sacred space, a nexus of divine energy dedicated to Hindu gods, particularly Shiva and Vishnu. Its landscape was punctuated by imposing red brick temples whose tall, intricately carved towers rose defiantly above the tree line. These structures were adorned with elaborate friezes and bas-reliefs depicting gods and scenes from ancient myths, their artistry preserved in stone for generations. The temples at Mai Sun were places of pilgrimage and spiritual reflection. Worshippers traversed long, winding paths through dense jungle foliage to reach this sanctuary, where incense smoke drifted through corridors and the melodious chanting of priests filled the air. Religious festivals were grand affairs, drawing devotees from all corners of the kingdom, each seeking blessings and spiritual guidance beneath the towering temple's shadows. Yet, despite their spiritual devotion, the Cham were no isolated mystics. The kingdom flourished through vibrant trade networks that spanned oceans. Their mastery of shipbuilding and navigation was unrivaled in the region, and Cham vessels became renowned for their sturdiness and seaworthiness. Crafted from timber harvested in the hinterlands, these ships plied the maritime trade routes of Southeast Asia, connecting Champa with distant markets in India, China, and the islands of the Malay archipelago. Ports along the Cham coast bustled with activity, marketplaces overflowing with exotic goods brought from afar, exchanged for Cham-produced pottery, textiles, and agricultural products. This thriving commerce made Champa wealthy and powerful, a status that inevitably invited both admiration and envy. The Cham Kingdom frequently clashed with its neighbours, most notably the Khmer Empire to the west, and later the Vietnamese Kingdom of Dai Viet to the north. These conflicts were marked by epic sea battles, skirmishes along jungle paths, and sieges of fortified towns. Cham warriors, celebrated for their bravery and naval prowess, became legendary figures. Their agile warships and skilled maritime tactics often proved decisive, allowing the kingdom to defend its independence for centuries. But the very openness to the world that brought Champa prosperity also exposed it to religious and cultural diversity. Buddhism, brought by missionaries and traders, found adherents among segments of Cham society, particularly in the central regions of the kingdom. Buddhist temples rose alongside Hindu shrines, creating a complex religious landscape where different faiths coexisted and sometimes blended in unique syncretism. In the southern reaches of Champa, Islam gained a foothold, brought by Arab and Malay traders. The conversion of southern Cham communities to Islam led to distinctive cultural practices and the adoption of Arabic script alongside traditional Cham writing. Despite such internal diversity, the unity and integrity of the Champa Kingdom began to falter as external pressures mounted. From the 11th century onward, the kingdom faced increasingly aggressive incursions from Dai Viet, the burgeoning Vietnamese state driven southward by the quest for fertile lands and strategic coastal access. The wars with Dai Viet were relentless and devastating. Town by town, valley by valley, Champa's territory shrank as its cities fell, temples were desecrated, and populations were displaced or absorbed into the expanding Vietnamese state. These centuries of warfare and retreat profoundly affected the Cham people. Their kingdom, once vibrant and powerful, diminished into fragmented pockets of resistance, their majestic temples reduced to ruins, their prosperous trade networks dismantled. The sacred city of my son, repeatedly besieged and eventually sacked, became emblematic of this decline. Its once proud temples crumbled under the relentless forces of Yet. Even in the face of such profound losses, Cham identity persisted. Small communities, fiercely protective of their traditions, endured. Particularly in the southern regions, Muslim Cham communities maintained their distinct cultural practices, continuing to live according to their ancestral customs and beliefs, despite increasing marginalization within the larger Vietnamese context. By the early 19th century, Champa was but a shadow of its former glory. In 1832, Dai Viet completed its conquest, formally annexing the last remnants of the Cham Kingdom. This marked the end of an era, the formal erasure of Champa as an independent political entity. Yet, the Cham people survived, their cultural memory kept alive in stories, rituals, and the persistent ruins of their once grand civilization. Today, remnants of Champa endure in the scattered archaeological sites along Vietnam's central coast. Visitors wander among the weathered bricks and fragmented statues at my son, marvelling at what remains of Cham ingenuity and artistry. Scholars painstakingly study inscriptions, pottery fragments, and temple ruins, piecing together the kingdom's rich history from these scattered relics. Meanwhile, contemporary Cham communities preserve the intangible heritage of their ancestors through language, dance, and religious practices, ensuring that Champa's legacy continues. In reflecting upon the history of the Champa Kingdom, one sees clearly the fragility and resilience inherent in human civilizations. Champa's story reminds us that even the most prosperous and powerful societies can succumb to external pressures and internal divisions. Yet it also illustrates the enduring strength of cultural identity, how traditions and beliefs can survive even in the face of overwhelming adversity. Ultimately, Champa's legacy is one of adaptation and persistence, a testament to human tenacity and the enduring power of cultural memory. In In the far southern reaches of the African continent, where the golden dust of the Kalahari meets the winding green-veined floodplains of the Limpopo River, there once stood a kingdom forgotten by time and buried beneath centuries of silence. Long before European ships pierced the horizon, and far before the walls of Great Zimbabwe rose in commanding splendour, there was Mapungubwe, a hilltop citadel from which kings ruled and trade routes unfurled like arteries of influence through the heart of southern Africa. It was a kingdom carved from red earth and crowned in gold, a place where the bones of ancient ancestors rested beneath beaded regalia and sceptres shaped from precious metal, and where the sound of the drum may have once echoed against stone walls, announcing the presence of royalty. To the untrained eye, the landscape around Mapungubwe Hill appears quiet, dusty savanna stretching toward the horizon, framed by rocky outcrops and punctuated by baobab trees that twist skyward like the fingers of sleeping giants. But buried beneath the ochre soil is a story that for centuries went untold. It was not until the middle of the 20th century, under cautious and restricted academic inquiry, that the remnants of Mapungubwe's grandeur began to surface. The kingdom had no written language, and what is known of it comes from the broken fragments of pottery, the architecture of collapsed walls, and the gleam of gold buried with the dead. Yet, from these fragments emerges a portrait of a state unlike any previously seen in southern Africa. Centered around Mapungubwe Hill, a sandstone plateau that rises suddenly and imposingly from the plains, the kingdom thrived from roughly 1075 to 1220 AD. At its height, it was home to a stratified society, one in which power and privilege were physically and symbolically elevated above the common plane. The king, or Mambo, resided at the summit of the hill, his domain separated from his subjects by verticality itself, a literal ascension that mirrored the spiritual and social gulf between ruler and ruled. This was no arbitrary choice of geography. The hill, though steep and difficult to access, offered the king security, seclusion, and the mystique of distance. Below him, the settlements of the elite and commoners spread across the valley floor, structured in accordance with rank and proximity to power. Stone walls enclosed the compounds of the upper classes, while those of lesser status dwelled in dwellings of wood and thatch, closer to the rivers and the surrounding fields. It was a society where position in life was demarcated not merely by wealth or birth, but by topography. The people of Mapungubwe were not isolated, nor were they insular. They were traders, craftsmen who cultivated millet and sorghum in the fertile soils near the riverbanks, raised cattle on the plains, and drew their lifeblood from the trade networks that extended eastward toward the Indian Ocean coast. Through port cities like Sofala, they traded gold, ivory, rhinoceros horn, and other goods in exchange for glass beads, cotton cloth, and ceramics from as far afield as Persia, India, and China. These connections are etched not only in the recovered artifacts of foreign origin, but in the sophistication of the society that emerged in this interior kingdom, far from the ocean yet undeniably tied to it. Gold was not merely a commodity in Mapungubwe. It was a symbol of divine authority and sacred rule. It adorned the dead in elaborate burials found on the hilltop, hidden for centuries beneath layers of dust and silence. There, archaeologists uncovered the remains of elite individuals interred with golden scepters, animal figurines, and thousands of glass beads, a funerary assemblage that spoke to a society of both great wealth and profound ritual significance. The most iconic of these finds, a delicate, almost luminous golden rhinoceros, became the emblem of the kingdom's lost majesty. It was crafted with meticulous skill, suggesting not only an artistic tradition, but a culture steeped in symbolic meaning and reverence for both animal power and royal lineage. And yet, for much of the 20th century, these discoveries remained cloistered behind museum walls and academic barriers, their meaning suppressed or diluted by a regime unwilling to acknowledge the implications. Under the apartheid state, the notion that indigenous Africans had once ruled a thriving kingdom, complete with a class system, trade networks and monumental architecture, clashed directly with the narrative of primitivism used to justify segregation and subjugation. For decades, even as excavations progressed under the auspices of white South African archaeologists, the full extent of Mapungubwe's significance was muted, its relevance relegated to footnotes and cautious commentary. But the evidence could not be forever silenced. The bones told their story in the curvature of their placement, the goods laid beside them, and the layers of stratification that hinted at generations of continuity and evolution. The stones whispered of a kingdom once alive with ceremony, law, and order. Even the soil, when sifted carefully, yielded secrets, fragments of pottery with distinctive patterns, slag from iron smelting, and beads that had once encircled necks or adorned sacred regalia. These were not the remnants of an isolated village, but the detritus of a capital, a centre of power that had ruled over vast stretches of territory, its influence measurable not in words but in the objects it left behind. It is believed that Mapungubwe reached its peak in the early 13th century, only to fade mysteriously within a few decades. Environmental pressures may have played a role, shifts in climate, overgrazing, or diminishing agricultural returns from the land. Alternatively, internal political fractures or the pull of new trade opportunities further east may have drawn the elite away, leading to the rise of Great Zimbabwe as the next locus of regional power. Whatever the cause, Mapungubwe Hill fell silent. The royal courts were abandoned, the drums stilled, and the gold entombed beneath the earth, left for time and sand to conceal. What remains today is a site of haunting beauty and solemn importance. Mapungubwe stands as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, its value finally recognised not only for its archaeological wealth, but for what it represents: the ability of African societies to build, govern, trade and create on a scale equal to any contemporary civilization. The site has become a symbol of cultural reclamation, a riposte to centuries of erasure and denial. Even now, standing atop the summit of the hill, the land stretches outward in quiet grandeur. One can imagine the king gazing down from this vantage, his eyes sweeping across the plains where his people toiled, traded, and worshipped. The wind rustles through the grasses below, the baobabs sway slowly with the patience of the ancients, and the river continues its endless, meandering journey eastward. The kingdom may be gone, but its echoes remain, stitched into the soil, lingering in the stones and rising finally into memory. For a long time, the golden rhinoceros lay hidden in vaults, deemed too politically fraught to exhibit. It was only in the late 20th and early 21st centuries that the full breadth of Mapungubwe's treasures emerged into the public light. When they did, they sparked not only national reflection, but a re-evaluation of the past. Scholars, artists, and descendants of the region began to piece together a fuller story, not merely a chronicle of trade and kingship, but a human saga of ingenuity, ambition, and the fragile impermanence of power. There are no chronicles written in ink and parchment to detail the lineage of Mapungubwe's kings, no marble monuments inscribed with deeds of conquest or edicts of law, but in the arrangement of bones and beads, in the golden figurines buried beside the powerful, and in the meticulously aligned walls that once encircled the homes of the elite, there is a testament all the same. It is a testament to the enduring truth that history does not belong solely to those who wrote it down, but also to those who lived it, built it, and left behind the whispering traces of a world their descendants are only just beginning to rediscover. Mapungubwe is a memory reborn, not conjured from legend but from earth, and in its rediscovery, the ground beneath southern Africa speaks with the voice of those who once ruled not with steel and conquest, but with gold, distance, and divine elevation, a kingdom in the hills lost to time, but never truly gone. In the slow churn of the East China Sea, where warm currents meet the morning mists drifting across subtropical isles, there once existed a kingdom unlike any other in the known world. It was not defined by size or military might, nor did it boast of imperial ambition. Instead, it thrived in the quiet rhythms of tide and trade, in the silken folds of embroidered robes, in the scent of incense curling through palace corridors, and in the hushed negotiations carried out in the tongues of many nations. The Ryukyu Kingdom, centered on the island of Okinawa, but extending far beyond its shores, stood as a liminal realm, a bridge suspended between the great civilizations of Asia, neither wholly Chinese nor Japanese, yet shaped by both. Long before the kingdom formally emerged in 1429, the Ryukyu Islands had known the sway of local chieftains and loosely allied polities. These were the days of the Gusuku period, marked by stone fortresses perched atop coral outcrops and a growing social stratification tied to agriculture, fishing, and inter-island trade. By the early 15th century, 3 principalities had risen on Okinawa: Hokushan in the north, Chuzan in the centre, and Nanzan in the south, each vying for influence in a terrain carved by jungle and coast. Their rivalries, however fierce, were tempered by the broader awareness of forces far larger than themselves. Chinese emissaries had already begun to appear on Ryukyuan shores, emissaries of the Ming dynasty seeking tribute partners and allies along the Pacific Rim. In the ceremonial language of empire, the Ryukyuans were to become vassals, but in practice they would become something more complex, intermediaries in a vast, culturally interwoven maritime world. It was Shohashi, a canny leader of Chuzan, who seized the moment. In 1429, he brought all 3 Okinawan polities under his rule, founding the first unified Ryukyu Kingdom. His ascension was ratified by the Ming court, who bestowed upon him a royal seal and regalia in recognition of his authority. Yet, even as Ryukyu became a tributary of China in the formal sense, the relationship opened doors to a rich diplomatic economy. Under the tribute system, Ryukyu could send envoys and goods to China in ceremonial exchange, and in return receive imperial gifts, titles, and trade access. This arrangement allowed Ryukyu to become a critical node in the East Asian trade network. Its ships travelled south to Siam, Java, and Malacca, and east to the Korean peninsula and Kyushu. The Ryukyuans ferried Chinese silk to Japan, Southeast Asian spices to Korea, and Japanese swords to the Ming court, acting as cultural and economic translators in a region often divided by language, custom, and suspicion. At the heart of this fluid diplomacy was Shuri, the royal capital, perched on a hill overlooking the southern coastline of Okinawa. There, Shuri Castle rose in vermilion hues, its lacquered gates and tiled roofs gleaming in the subtropical sun. Unlike the massive stone citadels of Japan, or the imperial grandeur of Beijing, Shuri reflected a different aesthetic, ornate but intimate, refined yet accessible. It was a seat of ceremonial pageantry, where processions of court officials in brightly dyed robes moved with choreographed grace through crimson halls, and where foreign envoys were received in careful deference, their languages interpreted by multilingual officials trained from youth. The Ryukyu court drew heavily from Chinese Confucian rituals, but it also retained deeply local customs, including the worship of ancestral spirits and the veneration of female priestesses known as Noro, who played central roles in court rites and communal blessings. Language, too, bore the imprint of Ryukyu's liminal identity. The court spoke a distinct form of Ryukyuan, a language family separate from Japanese and now largely endangered, though echoes of it remain in Okinawan dialects today. Written communication relied on classical Chinese, as was common throughout East Asia, but the spoken rhythms of the kingdom carried traces of southern islands and seafaring cadence. Songs known as kuduchi and ritual chants known as omoro preserve genealogies and mythologies, passed from generation to generation like fragile strands of silk across time. Yet beneath the courtly refinement and diplomatic adroitness, there lay a tension that would only grow in time. For all its careful navigation between powers, Ryukyu existed in a precarious space. In 1609, this fragility was exposed. The Shimazu clan of Satsuma, based in southern Japan, launched an invasion of the Ryukyu Kingdom. Their samurai landed with precision, cutting through the island's defences and forcing King Shonei to surrender. Though Ryukyu was not formally annexed, it became a vassal of Satsuma in all but name. From that point forward, the kingdom occupied a strange duality. It remained a tributary state to China, a relationship both sides were eager to preserve for commercial and diplomatic reasons, while quietly submitting to the authority of the Tokugawa shogunate. The subterfuge required to maintain this arrangement was immense. Ryukyuan envoys to China were instructed never to reveal their subjugation by Japan, and the Satsuma overlords carefully stage-managed the appearance of independence. Behind the scenes, however, Satsuma extracted heavy tribute and manipulated Ryukyuan governance. The court at Shuri was allowed to persist, but it did so under constant surveillance, its autonomy undercut by the quiet machinery of Japanese influence. Even so, the Ryukyuans continued to nurture their cultural identity. They expanded their musical forms, refined their textile arts, and deepened their rituals. The twin shadows of China and Japan loomed large, but within those confines, Ryukyu carved a space for itself, not entirely free, but fiercely distinct. The 18th and 19th centuries brought new pressures. As Western powers edged into Asia, the delicate web of regional diplomacy began to fray. Commodore Perry's black ships arrived in Okinawa before they sailed for Edo, and though Ryukyu had little means to resist, it did not collapse under foreign curiosity. American and European visitors often marveled at the kingdom's cosmopolitanism, its syncretic rituals, and the elegance of its court manners. Some saw it as a remnant of a more harmonious, less bellicose East. But such romantic notions did little to shield Ryukyu from the rising tide of Japanese nationalism. With the Meiji Restoration of 1868, Japan underwent a radical transformation, casting off its feudal past and centralizing power under a modernizing imperial state. In this new order, there was little room for ambiguous vassalages or semi-autonomous kingdoms. The Meiji government moved to assert direct control. In 1872, Ryukyu was declared a han, or domain, and its king was rebranded as a mere domainal head. By 1879, the fiction of autonomy ended altogether. Japanese troops entered Shuri, deposed the Ryukyuan monarch Shotai, and formally annexed the kingdom as Okinawa Prefecture. The red walls of Shuri Castle, once the heart of a vibrant diplomatic realm, now stood under a new banner. The language of the court was suppressed, its rituals deemed backward or irrelevant, its priestesses dismissed or absorbed into Shinto institutions. In schools, Japanese was taught. In public life, Ryukyuan identity was discouraged. The annexation was not merely political, it was cultural. A centuries-old kingdom was folded into a new nation-state with little regard for its unique heritage. Yet the memory of Ryukyu did not vanish. It lingered in the cadence of Okinawan folk songs, in the embroidered patterns of traditional garments, in the scent of incense rising from local altars, where ancestors were still honoured in quiet defiance of modern erasure. During World War II, Okinawa would become a battlefield, a place of immense suffering and strategic consequence. In the decades that followed, Okinawa's relationship with the Japanese mainland remained fraught. The presence of American military bases, the memory of war, and the long shadow of annexation contributed to a sense of cultural alienation and political marginalization. Movements emerged calling for recognition of Okinawa's distinct history, for the preservation of its language, and for acknowledgement of the Ryukyu Kingdom, not as a footnote to Japan's rise, but as a world unto itself, a diplomatic bridge, a cultural crossroads, a kingdom once luminous between the continents. Today, tourists visit the reconstructed halls of Shuri Castle, walking its grounds with cameras in hand, unaware that they tread the remnants of a vanished realm. The walls speak in silence, the stones also remembering a time when Okinawa was not merely a prefecture, but the heart of a seafaring kingdom that knew how to survive in the eddies of empire. The Ryukyu Kingdom may have faded from the political map, but in the songs of elders, in the movements of traditional dance, and in the quiet resistance to forgetting, it still breathes. Far from the lush jungles of the Yucatan and the fertile valleys that nurtured the Aztec heartland, the Tarascan Empire rose in silence amid the rugged highlands and pine-covered hills of western Mexico. Here, in what is now the state of Michoacán, a realm emerged that would challenge the fierce ambitions of the Aztec Empire, maintaining its independence through a mastery of resources and military ingenuity unmatched elsewhere in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. Its people called themselves the Purépecha, and their story remains one of the least known but most remarkable chapters in the region's history. The mountains of Michoacán are harsh and beautiful, a landscape of sharp cliffs, volcanic lakes, and steeply terraced hillsides. In such an environment, survival meant mastering the terrain. The Purépecha, disciplined and resourceful, excelled at harnessing their homeland's abundant copper deposits, which allowed them to create tools and weapons that transformed their society. While other civilizations across Mesoamerica sharpened blades of obsidian, volcanic glass fragile yet lethal, the Tarascans shaped the first true bronze weapons and tools in the Americas. Their metal craft provided a decisive technological advantage that shaped their fate in ways both glorious and tragic. The Tarascan civilization crystallized around the 14th century as small villages clustered around Lake Patuaro expanded into towns and then fortresses, each settlement linked by roads that cut through dense forests and mountainous terrain. At its heart stood Tzintzuntzan, meaning place of the hummingbirds, the capital that would later grow into an imposing political and religious center. Built atop a commanding hill overlooking Lake Pátzcuaro, Tzintzuntzan's terraces rose from the earth in precise steps. Temples made of carefully placed volcanic stone dominated the skyline, where sacred fires burned perpetually and priests offered prayers to gods whose names have scarcely survived the ravages of conquest and time. The Tarascan ruler, or Kazonchi, was not merely a king, he was a deity incarnate. His word, sacred law. His people regarded him as the living embodiment of Kurikawari, the god of war and the sun. Under the Kazonchi's watchful eye, the empire grew from isolated villages to a sophisticated society stretching across Michoacán. Protected by fortified settlements whose defensive walls and carefully planned battlements remain impressive centuries later. Yet, despite their military strength, the Tarascan Empire's rulers balanced conquest with diplomacy, often preferring peaceful incorporation of neighboring communities into their domain rather than outright war. This strategic restraint enabled a diverse and prosperous society that flourished far from the oppressive tribute systems imposed by the Aztecs. The language of the Tarascans, Purépecha, remains an enigmatic puzzle for linguists. Unrelated to the tongues of nearby cultures such as the Nahuatl spoken by the Aztecs, Purépecha appears entirely isolated, an ancient language whose origins remain shrouded in mystery. Despite the Spanish conquest and subsequent suppression of indigenous culture, fragments of the Purépecha tongue have survived in scattered oral traditions and sparse colonial documents, offering a tantalizing but incomplete glimpse into the Tarascan worldview. Even today, linguists continue to unravel the few surviving texts, hoping to illuminate more clearly the beliefs and histories of a civilization whose voice was almost entirely silenced. Within the walls of their fortified cities, the Tarascans nurtured sophisticated traditions of artistry and craftsmanship, especially in metallurgy. Tarascan metalworkers smelted copper and combined it with arsenic and tin, producing bronze alloys whose strength and sharpness surpassed the obsidian blades favoured by neighbouring peoples. Such advanced metallurgy gave rise to a specialised class of artisans who crafted not only weapons but finely ornamented jewellery, ritual objects and exquisite sculptures that adorned temples and royal chambers. Bronze axes, knives and spearheads, beautifully polished and expertly balanced, became symbols of Tarascan ingenuity and martial prowess. Yet metal was not their only achievement. In architecture too, the Tarascans excelled. Their cities and ceremonial centres boasted meticulously engineered platforms, plazas and pyramids. At Tzintzuntzan, the distinctive rounded temples known as yakutas overlooked the lake. their circular forms differing markedly from the stepped, angular pyramids of the Aztecs. Each yacata, rising high above the plaza, contained altars and sacred spaces where the priest performed elaborate ceremonies and sacrifices. The Tarascans' careful urban planning underscored an advanced understanding of both religious symbolism and civic organization, a legacy preserved today in their enigmatic stone remains. At the height of their power, the Tarascan Empire controlled an area of approximately 75,000 square kilometers, governing a population estimated at over 1 million people. Their influence extended far beyond Michoacán, reaching into what are now the states of Jalisco, Guerrero, and Guanajuato. Tribute flowed into the capital from villages and towns across the realm, enriching its rulers and funding ambitious construction projects. Such prosperity attracted the envy of the Aztec Empire, whose armies relentlessly sought to expand their dominion across Mesoamerica. The Aztec military machine, renowned for its brutal efficiency, was accustomed to swift victories. Their warriors, clad in jaguar skins and eagle feathers, marched across central Mexico, conquering city after city and exacting tribute. Yet, when they faced the Tarascans, the Aztecs encountered something entirely new, an enemy whose disciplined ranks wielded bronze-tipped spears and battle axes, weapons capable of cleaving through feathered shields and obsidian blades with alarming ease. The Tarascans were fierce defenders of their homeland, and the military confrontation between the two empires would become legendary. Historical accounts from the period, few and fragmentary though they are, depict repeated Aztec assaults against Tarascan fortifications. Each Aztec invasion, however ambitious, met with failure. Tarascan generals, skillful tacticians who understood their rugged homeland intimately, employed guerrilla tactics, strategic fortifications, and disciplined infantry formations to devastating effect. In the high mountain passes and along lake shores, Tarascan warriors ambushed Aztec columns, unleashing volleys of arrows and bronze javelins, their defensive positions nearly impregnable. Defeat after defeat drained the Aztecs' ambitions, forcing them to respect the Tarascans' sovereignty and seek easier prey elsewhere. Yet even as the Tarascans successfully repelled invasions from their neighbours, an entirely different threat loomed on the eastern horizon. In the early 16th century, Spanish conquistadors began to penetrate the Mexican interior. After Hernán Cortés conquered Tenochtitlan in 1521, Spanish interest swiftly turned westward toward the mysterious realm of the Tarascans. News reached Tzintzuntzan of a strange, powerful enemy that had brought down the mighty Aztec Empire, an enemy that rode horses, wore steel armor, and wielded guns capable of unleashing thunder and flame. The Kazonchi at the time faced a grim choice: resist as fiercely as the Aztecs had and risk annihilation, or negotiate and attempt to preserve his empire's independence. Initially, he sought diplomacy. When Spanish envoys arrived at Tzintzuntzan in 1522, the Tarascan ruler welcomed them cautiously. Spanish greed, however, soon overcame diplomacy. Stories of Tarascan treasures, especially their legendary gold and copper reserves, ignited the conquistadors' imagination, and tensions quickly escalated. In 1530, the infamous conquistador Nuño de Guzmán marched into Michoacán, determined to extract wealth and power from the Tarascans at any cost. Guzmán's ruthless methods shocked even fellow Spaniards. He arrested Tangaxuan under false charges, subjected him to mock trials, tortured him, and finally executed him in public, sending shockwaves through the empire. Leaderless and demoralized, the Tarascan Empire unraveled quickly. Within a generation, their cities were abandoned or occupied by Spanish troops, their temples converted into churches or stripped of precious metals, their society fractured by forced labor, disease, and despair. Unlike the Aztecs or Maya, whose legends persisted vividly in European imagination, the Tarascans faded rapidly into historical obscurity. Their language nearly disappeared, preserved only in fragments and isolated communities. Their culture, once thriving and sophisticated, was relegated to footnotes in colonial records. Today, the legacy of the Tarascan Empire survives in the landscape itself, in silent ruins overlooking lakes and valleys, in bronze artifacts displayed behind museum glass, in local traditions quietly maintained in Michoacan's mountain villages. Archaeologists, linguists, and historians continue to piece together fragments of their lost world, struggling to reclaim the voices and achievements of a people who stood resiliently against the Aztecs, only to fall swiftly and tragically to European conquest. The Tarascan Empire remains a story of paradox, powerful yet quickly forgotten, technologically advanced yet historically overlooked. Their bronze weapons and fortified cities stand testament to their ingenuity, their resistance against the Aztecs a testament to their fierce independence, their sudden collapse a cautionary tale of empire, ambition, and vulnerability. Their story demands remembrance, not only as a lesson in resilience, but as a reminder of how swiftly even the greatest civilizations can fade into silence beneath the relentless march of history.